Let's now consider the work of Edward Thorndike, who developed the concept or the theory of law of effect. And he said that actions that are followed by desirable outcomes will be more likely to be repeated, while those followed by undesirable outcomes are less likely to be repeated. So Skinner's theory of operant conditioning is built on the ideas of Edward Thorndike. And he introduced the concept of reinforcement and was the first to apply psychological principles to the area of learning. And much of the work that we do and we follow within behaviorism is built on the concepts that Edward Thorndike introduced. If you remember last year in the historical timeline that we looked at in Educational Psychology 1, you'll remember Edward Thorndike was a very prominent theorist within that or on that timeline. We now move on to the cognitive perspective, and the cognitive perspective focuses on non-observable states, and it notes the existence of internal mental states. So behaviorism disregarded the internal mental states. But here, the cognitive perspective says that the non-observable, such as desire, motivation, ideas, and beliefs, are what influence behavior and what we need to consider when we look at the way people react to certain events or the way people believe, the way people have or develop their ideas and so on. And learning is based on how people perceive, remember, think, and problem solve. Memory structures determine how information is perceived. So if your memory structure is built in a specific way, this is how your information will be perceived. This is how it will be processed, stored, retrieved, and even forgotten. It encompasses perception, categorization, memory, knowledge, representation, language, and of course the thinking process. The major theorist within this perspective is Jean Piaget, which you know from previous modules. He developed this theory, and he also developed the various stages of cognitive development, which we will look at, but which you should remember from previous modules. Vygotsky talked about the social cultural development theory and the importance of social interaction. So he was saying that social interaction with others is extremely important for the development of cognition or the way in which we think. And he developed the zone of proximal development, which we'll talk about later, but this is something upon which a lot of work has been built, like scaffolding, for example. Then Noam Chomsky was known as the father of modern linguistics, and he believed that language is innate. Apologies for that error there in the word innate, but he believed that language ability is innate. We're born with it, and it's something that we don't have to necessarily acquire, but it's something that really exists within our ability or within our range of possibilities. And then Jerome Bruner developed the concept of scaffolding, and this is really about the support provided to the learning or the development of new tasks and abilities. So first, let's look at Piaget. And Piaget believed that there were three components, and that was schemas, which is the building blocks of knowledge. So the way we build our schemas is the way that we accept and interrogate or develop new knowledge. Then the adaptation process enables transition from one stage to another. So this is really about acquiring new information, acquiring new ideas and ways of thinking. And we start out usually at the area of equilibrium, which is the neutral state. A new situation develops, which causes disequilibrium. We have to accommodate this information, and then assimilation or the inclusion of this new information into our system then happens, and then we'll obviously go back to the state of equilibrium. So how can I explain this? How do I understand this? We are in an equilibration state, a state of equilibrium. A new situation arises. So for example, we're in a new country and we see that people drink milk from glass bottles. This is a new situation for us. It's not something we've ever seen. And we question, why are people drinking milk from a glass bottle? Very basic example. This causes a state of disequilibrium because it's not something that we know. It's not something new. Someone takes us aside and explains to us, this is how we do things here. This is how we drink our milk. So we accommodate this information and it becomes assimilated into our knowledge. So we accept this information to be true. We then move on, and this is just how things are. It's accepted new knowledge. Then Piaget talks about the stages of cognitive development, which is the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. Now, before we progress and look at these stages, we need to remember certain things about Piaget. So Piaget was really the first psychologist to make a systematic study of cognitive development. He actually looked at what is this thing that helps us and Piaget's theory of cognitive development explains how a child constructs a mental model of the world. He totally disagreed with the idea that intelligence was fixed, that we're born with intelligence and that's just how it is. He felt that there is development. And he regarded cognitive development as a process which occurs due to biological maturation and interaction with the environment. So because we are older and because we are learning from our environment, our way of thinking, our intelligence is then changed, developed, and progressed. So before Piaget's work, basically the common assumption in psychology is that children are less competent thinkers than adults. But Piaget showed that young people or young children think in strikingly different ways to adults. So it's not that they sensory motor stage, and we experience the world through senses and actions, putting things in our mouth. You see kids are always putting things in their mouth, touching things. The developmental phenomena is object permanence, and object permanence means that even if something is no longer in the child's line of sight, they still know it to be there. And this is why what kids develop stranger danger, is because they know that mom should be here, but she's not here, and they're looking for mom. And separation anxiety and stranger anxiety happens at before 2 years old, a lot earlier than I think it's between the ages of 6 to 9 months, where object permanence and strange anxiety begins. I just checked that information, so it's around 6 to 10 months, which is usually the age that strange anxiety will really become serious for children. Then to the ages from 2 to about 6 or 7 is the operational phase, and representing things with words and images using intuitive rather than logical reasoning. And this is where children will engage in pretend play. About 7 to 11 years old, it's concrete operational, so you think logically about concrete events. Concrete events are things that you can actually explain and you can see and you can do. Grasping concrete analogies and performing arithmetical operations. And here's where conservation and mathematical transformations take place. So I want to talk about this because at the concrete operational phase, we have to understand that children are thinking quite concretely. So things that they can see and understand. So if you expect them to perform very challenging mathematical sums, they are not ready and they're not at the developmental stage to be able to perform or to be able to do those mathematical exercises. So this is why it's important for us to know what stage of development a child is at. And then about 12 to adulthood is formal operational, and years where abstract reasoning can take place. It doesn't have to be a concrete event. It can be an abstract, something that you can think about, something that you could reason to be true, where you can make deductions about possibilities of events happening. It's around abstract logic, and there's a lot more mature model reasoning taking place at this stage. So if we look at the work of Lev Vygotsky, he developed the social developmental theory. And Vygotsky's theory stressed the fundamental role of social interaction in the development of cognition. He believed that the community, your environment, the people around you play a central role in the process of making meaning of life, making meaning of the events that's happening around you. And unlike Piaget, who thought that children's development must necessarily precede their learning, Vygotsky said no, learning is necessary and a universal aspect, specifically human psychological function. So what does this mean? It means that social learning tends to come before the development, And so it doesn't mean that you have to wait for a child to be at the specific stage for them to be learning. They're learning all the time. They're looking at their social, their society. They're looking at their family, looking at their parents, and they're learning from those people, irrespective of how old they are or where they are in their stage of development. And he really developed what is known as a social cultural approach to cognitive development. He's saying that, you know what, learning is about what we see, what we understand other people do, and it's not something that necessarily means we have to wait for our brain to catch up. So Vygotsky refers to the elementary mental functioning such as attention, sensation, perception, and memory. He places a lot of emphasis on culture affecting cognitive development. He also places considerably more emphasis on social factors contributing to cognitive development, as I said earlier. Also, a lot of emphasis on the role of language in cognitive development. And he also said that adults are an important source of cognitive development. So I'm going to talk about this in the next slide when we look at the zone of proximal development. This table is just giving you an idea, although they're under the same banner. Piaget and Vygotsky do have a. If we look at Vygotsky's zone of proximal development and his theory around this, he said that children who are in the center, they will want to develop a new task, and this task is beyond their reach. What they can do then is depend on knowledgeable others. So who are these knowledgeable others? They could be teachers, they could be parents, and they could be peers. And in today's world, they could also be technology and tools such as laptops or the internet or whatever the case is. So this area here, or these knowledgeable others, helps them to reach the area of beyond their control. So if they're trying to learn something new, trying to learn a new skill, for example, they're trying to learn the guitar. They would like to learn the guitar, but they're not able to do it right now. So what do? They depend on the music teacher to help them build those skills, help them to understand how to play the guitar so that they can this area right here. Sorry about that. So this is how we would look at the zone of proximal development and scaffolding. Scaffolding is this person creating, if you know what a scaffold is like against a building, it helps you to reach the next level. And this is really how I understand the zone of proximal development. I want to add one last point here. Vygotsky he suggests that teachers use cooperative learning exercises where less competent children develop, and excuse the word less competent, children develop with the help from their skillful peers. And this is where teachers often use in the classroom peer-to-peer learning or peer support or group support. So a child that may have already grasped a concept will help and assist a child struggling with that because they feel that they are more able to reach their friend rather than the teacher doing it. Noam Chomsky, we spoke about language acquisition, and before him, most people thought that language acquisition was mostly a learned process, where, for example, many believe that language skills were developed solely through watching and learning our parents and other people in our environment. Chomsky's notion is that the brain is pre-wired for language. It's definitely different to what people believe. So, for example, where Skinner said that language was dependent on input only, remember he spoke about the tabula rasa where he says you are a blank slate. Chomsky believes that people are born with a predisposition for learning language or to learn language. So we already have it in our brain. Therefore, children do not need specific training or education to learn to speak. No trigger is needed. It will happen when it needs to happen. It will happen on its own. And an interesting point, he says that the age 3 to 10, a child is most likely to learn a new language completely and utterly from its spoken language to its written language if given the opportunity. And he talks about this being the optimum learning stage or age. Jerome Bruner developed the scaffolding of learning, which is building upon work that we can do by being supported to reach levels of work that we cannot do yet. He was obviously influenced by the works of Vygotsky, which is the zone of proximal development that we just spoke about. And he said that active support is needed in the learning process. Support can be reduced as a child gets more experienced, and then there are 3 modes of representation as identified here.